Attention listeners, this is a bonus episode. You can tell by how really short the episode is after editing, right?
Yeah.
You're not supposed to talk. This is my message.
Aww.
Just letting you know that this episode is a bonus episode uploaded on an off Sunday for our podcast. There will still be an episode uploaded next Sunday, which if I have done my math correctly using a calendar on my computer, it should be still uploaded August 28th, will be our next episode about the international pilot of Twin Peaks. So this has not delayed the return. This is just a little something extra slid under your mat, smelling like some roses.
I have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the Wonderful and Strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the post to my Gazette.
Wait, which one came first?
Depending on the continuity, the Gazette, and then it got renamed to Post, but people still call it the Gazette. So you're newer, but not improved.
Brilliant. And I am, in fact, the new and unimproved Unplugged Professor. Pleasure having you here, Kalil. Pleasure having you here in front of these various amounts of papers stacked up between us.
What, pray tell, are these papers? Ask the listener who has not observed the title of this episode before clicking on it or letting it autoplay.
This is the issue, these are the issues, those are the issues of the Twin Peaks Gazette.
Circa 1991.
Yes, and only
The
1991.
official fan magazine newspaper.
Official fan magazine newspaper, but also there's also the respect that it's been advertised in collaboration with Mark Frost and David Lynch. This is going to be a funky one.
So it is official material. It's just one of the weirdest because you just can't get a hold of it very easily. And it's also a weird amalgamation of in-universe, but also interviews and articles about the series with like actors and such. So it isn't like the cards that are mostly playing it as though you're like in the town of Twin Peaks. This is a mix.
Yeah, it actively talks about like characters in Twin Peaks as if it was being published out of Twin Peaks, but also it actively talks about the show and its continuation and its existence.
It does
outside.
both.
It does both. It's a very strange entity, and the strange entity, how did you like it? How did you enjoy this overall series of papers?
Well, before I say that, I want to let the audience know there may be spoilers for any and all David Lynch materials.
No, there's no spoilers allowed anymore. We have to speak about this paper completely spoiler-free, no context needed.
Trivia sources include the Twin Peaks Wiki, Wikipedia, and LynchNet.
LynchNet?
LynchNet.
LynchNet?
It's a very old website, yeah.
It sounds very old.
It's very old. I like the newspaper. I guess I want to preface everything by saying that it is not a major in-universe work the way that the books are or even the cards are. This feels like it's less trying to be quote-unquote canon. There is in-universe fiction here, but it almost feels a bit more like published fan fiction, which I'm all for creatively. I think that's cool. It's just, I will say going forward, I don't consider these things in-universe as actually happening. I more look at the Gazette as being a reflection of the fan community at the time, and I think that that is a pretty neat little thing.
I, too, thought this was a neat little thing. How much I overall take in these interesting new characters that they throw into Twin Peaks while also revisiting the old ones. They're fun curiosities, they're fun lead-ins, and how much I put them into the canon, like, is more so amidst a chuckle more than it is, like, taking it as gospel. But I don't think that it ever abandons that tone throughout this overall series of work. This overall piece has various things such as competitions for fans to get involved with. There are notes of other fans. There are individuals that are going into this that seem to be having a lot of fun. This very much, having the note of official fan work, is probably the best way to outright describe it in many regards. But I will also say that some of the formatting did get to me at times. Like, there's a point in which the typeface becomes much smaller. if only to potentially fit it in. And also the formatting of things such as the interviews changes from something that's neat that distinguishes between the bold face as well as the smaller face, and some just go into large stretches of overall text. And I gotta say, since like it debuts with like that thick bolden text and the other ones go into less, sometimes it was difficult for me personally to sort of like read along and keep along, especially when some of these subjects kind of repeat themselves multiple times through the interview. So I think there is some criticism due with that, but at the same time, there's some very, very fun things that I think that if you're a Twin Peaks fan, that you're in for a genuine treat for. But it'd probably be hard to get your hands on this in general.
So again, this is an official publication. It ran for 3 whole issues. It was intended to be the official fan club magazine for the remainder of the show, but the show lasted less time than they thought it would.
Even like these were coming out in monthly segments from what I can see from one of the papers we had.
Mm-hmm.
The Gazette was advertised for $8 for a full year, and some of the items that you would end up getting were like a mug. You would end up getting, which was apparently a hard thing to get out. Apparently they were having some issues getting the mugs out. You'd get residents in Twin Peaks, likely a little note that says, hey, you're a resident in Twin Peaks, with a little happy face and thumbs up. I don't know how that would have worked out. But also the issues themselves. And if you have residents inside of Twin Peaks, you were able to actually enter in the various competitions. I think there was like 3 running at the same time, like the Gifted and the Damned, the Twin Peaks, like Miss Twin Peaks pageant. There was a lot of fun things to go through with it. But again, it's the funny thing that it's like for $8 for a year, and we got 3 issues. Mm-hmm. This piece absolutely makes it clear that the magazine is quickly dying off after about the 2nd or 3rd issue.
And they did not know that was going to happen when they first started.
They did not know when they first started. And also, I will also mention that some of the competitions and how they're sort of worded, that even though like the issues were dying off, and it was recognized that it was dying off later with another letter, it still seemed like there was still hope that this would keep on going in some capacity. Unfortunately, it couldn't, and like, the big question is, like, why would you start to publish a Gazette at the end of the show? Well, thankfully, we got some bonus material with this that also included a legal document that was addressed to someone who seemed to work for the paper. I say that because this individual was also noted having some additional fun bonus trivia that also desperately asked people for more information, but still was a P.O. box to reach. It said that the name of Twin Peaks was the thing that caused complication with something such as this published work, that they couldn't really use it. And this was about, I would say, about 5-6 months before the first issue was published. After that, once those issues were able to get published, likely they were able to reach over that hill, that was when the show was already in its like hiatus for a bit, in which like it would be like the episodes would come down the line, and that was basically the end of the show then. So they couldn't have the month by month excitement and build up that I would feel be necessary for this to not only seem like uneven in its overall tone, but also for this fan investment to go along with. But also there's the sad hope that like, hey, Twin Peaks, please keep going. Please keep going.
Yeah, the first issue of this newspaper came out in February of 1991. For context, that's around episode 21. So when the professor says that they wanted to do this like 6 months.
Between 6 minutes and 6 months.
Yeah,
somewhere in that
they wanted to do it 6 months earlier. You're talking like middle of the show or earlier than middle versus like maybe, basically start of season 2 versus the show's already winding down to the final 8 episodes. And then the third issue was published in April of 1991 around episode 25. Mm-hmm. So it was just constantly playing keep up in a way that just didn't work out. And so you end up with this Gazette as being a very strange like time capsule of this specific period at the end of season 2. You get pretty much a glimpse then of how people were reacting to the show being canceled, mm-hmm. and just how quickly it fell apart in that regard. And so the magazine was basically canceled once the show was canceled, although they did tease the idea that maybe they would keep going, and it just obviously didn't happen.
No, it was not just like they would keep going. The second issue is when they actually bring up, and we'll likely go a little bit deeper into that later, citizens opposing the offings of Peaks. Like
A.K.A. Coop.
Yep, a.k.a. Coop. Like, it's heavily influenced through that entire issue of, like, we're trying our best not to stop this. Please send in letters to Bob Iger. We want Twin Peaks to keep going. And there was a large amount of fan responses. Like, some of them were a little bit crazy in the most fantastic way. But regardless, this was a sadly dying newspaper, and it is both gifted and damned for that respect.
For context, they were urging people to send to Bob Iger, who was at the head of ABC. So they were trying to approach the network with fan letters.
Bob Iger was also the general head of ABC's department, also Disney. Bob Iger
Isn't
was
it
a
later
big deal.
Disney, or was it already Disney?
No,
at that time?
I'm pretty sure that ABC was owned by.
Right, I just
Iger
didn't
as
know
well.
if he, because I know there's like a subsidiary of Disney. I didn't know if he was involved in Disney specifically or just
Yeah.
its outlet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting, and on one hand, it is sad that the magazine couldn't continue, but then you have other publications outside of being official that would continue, the most famous of which is Wrapped in Plastic. And I have not gone and dived through all of Wrapped in Plastic. I think it's something I would love to do in the future if I get the means and time to do so and focus to do so. But, I've picked up like the Essential Wrapped in Plastic book. I'm interested. But like, it feels like what the Twin Peaks Gazette tried to do, it was almost limited by having the Twin Peaks name and being official product.
Yes.
Then once the show went off, it couldn't keep licensing that to work it, I think. That's my understanding. Whereas Wrapped in Plastic was able to kind of get away with continuing in an unofficial capacity.
Yes,
and
because-
do those kind of interviews. I don't know if Wrapped in Plastic does the in-universe fiction, fan fiction-y stuff. Maybe they do. I wouldn't be surprised if they host like fan art and stuff in there.
Yeah.
But I know it mostly for its articles and for its interviews. I've heard about those before. And then you got websites like 25 Years Later and et cetera, et cetera. So the Twin Peaks fan community had publications after this. Just this is the strange one that was authorized. Which I don't know about you, but do you know of any other media that you've encountered or heard of where they have an official fan magazine? Official one.
Official ones, I'm unsure of myself. I've seen many fanzines that have like collected fun bits of art across various communities, but I will also admit that I'm fairly new to the zine space.
And I think this was a different time too. Like we were not active Twin Peaks people in the 90s. We were inactive like toddlers and childs.
I was -3 years old.
So I don't think we had much influence there. As far as the actual like who made the Gazette, it's a little unknown. They don't give like a full listing of all the people who worked on this. We do see Martha Knight pop up as the editor of all 3 issues. And she also gets some specific writing credits above some of the interviews. It'll say that she did the introduction.
Yes.
And then in the bonus materials, I kept seeing the name Steve Ryan pop up multiple times.
Yes.
So it feels like he might have been one of the people who was trying to get this started.
Yeah.
Maybe he owned this originally, this idea. So I know Steve Ryan and Martha Knight, but I don't think this is a 2-person team.
No.
So
No, it was more.
I would give credit if I knew who else made this.
There are some stretches of overall credits throughout. It's just also latent with other like interesting information around them.
And some of it might also be like in character name. We don't even know if they're the real names, which is fine if that's how they wanted to be addressed. Like you mentioned earlier, this is written in cooperation with David Lynch and Mark Frost. They're also listed as inspirators. That's the word. I've never heard that word. I've heard inspirational people, basically.
I heard inspirations, but inspirators?
Inspirators. Sounds like conspirators. Like they're like the other people who helped us kill Julius Caesar.
I was thinking more so like it sounded like a medical device, like to keep something alive.
Keeping the inspiration.
Like a respirator and inspirator.
I think both work. Both work really well in this context. I'd be curious how much David Lynch and Mark Frost really were aware of what this thing was doing. I think they more just like signed off like, yeah, sure, do whatever. I get the vibe that they were just like cool with it, but I don't know if they were actively involved in like giving it ideas. I'm not sure. As far as how we got our hands on reading this, because it is very much out of print. It is very much not available in any capacity. The only way you're going to get this is if you either own the original copies somehow, like you find someone who still has these like 30-year-old newspaper clippings, or you find someone who is looking to redistribute unofficial copies of those. So I did get this set from Bruce Phillips on eBay. And that is Bruce W412 on eBay. And I got them from Bruce Phillips after kind of thinking about it over and over again, because Bruce Phillips is kind of a famous figure within Twin Peaks community lore. There is a great article, an interview with him on 25 Years Later called The Gordon Cole of Twin Peaks Collectors, which I know Gordon Cole's a dirty name around you, Professor, but he seems to be like really well established, really well liked. He's got a whole bunch of stuff that he was looking to to redistribute there. We have issues 1, 2, and 3, plus the special edition that seems to have been given out at conventions.
Yeah, it seems to be like a compilation piece in which you're able to get snippets from all 3 volumes, and it's compiled into one point. It says, meet us at this booth. So likely something in which you can meet fellow fans, likely pick up the collector's edition, because that's also advertised there, which collects the other 3 issues, if you will, in their complete completion. So it is genuinely a very nice sampling, and it's a very nice time piece, little time capsule to have on hand.
Yeah, and then Bruce Phillips also threw in some thank you bonus materials, a few extra sheets in there. Some of it's some legal kind of documents going back and forth between Scott Ryan and the legal representatives of the Twin Peaks IP. Included also was a message from the mayor that would have gone out to people who were looking to get into the newspaper when it first came out. Mayor Dwayne Milford is listed as the author, and in this letter, he acknowledges Twin Peaks as a show. So, Mayor Dwayne Milford, if we call this canon, which we don't, but if we did, he would acknowledge with a supernatural awareness that Twin Peaks is a television show, or else Twin Peaks was a television show. You could just watch Invitation to Love and then stay tuned another hour and Twin Peaks would be on TV. That happened.
Mayor Milford gazed into the fourth wall and the fourth wall gazed back.
He does also make it sound like the Twin Peaks Gazette you can buy is the local newspaper from the town, which adds even further complexity.
Oh, God.
Because he does talk about it like, now you too can have our magazine. Because he basically starts off like, people are always wondering how to get more into Twin Peaks. Well, did you know that our local newspaper is available to buy and subscribe to for $8 a year? And it's like, wait, so they are, because like right away in issue 1, I'm looking at it literally on a table. It has Agent Cooper on there, and they're talking about how well-dressed he is, and they have things over here talking of interviews with the actors, and I'm like, wait, this is in their newspaper, the interviews with the actors? So it doesn't make any sense.
No, Twin Peaks just had to be honest with itself, and it just had to say, you know what, I am a TV show, and everyone also knew along the way. They just don't bring it up because it's just normal life for everyone in Twin Peaks.
I also think it's funny that when Dwayne Milford in this letter refers to his brother's marriage, he does it very casually. He doesn't seem particularly angry at Dougie Milford, which I would have assumed any time Dwayne Milford had a chance to write about his brother, it would involve slander, but somehow this was very neutral in tone.
He's trying to be a good mayor now that his brother has been dead for long enough.
He also addresses the reader with the opening, Dear Twin Peaker.
Hi, I'm a peaker.
Do you identify Unplugged Professor as a Twin Peaker?
It seems like the common phrase that I've been seeing whenever it comes to material like this to be recognized as a peaker.
Is it?
It's just a very... I think I saw it in the publication like a few times through this.
Oh.
And like reading through it makes sense as like a nice little branding. It's just also very humorous.
I think of tweaking when I hear that. Like I think of like a
tweaker.
tweaker.
I think of someone who's like looking through your shades in the middle of the night.
Both universally positive connotations.
Universally positive, as long as it's to fictional characters.
More on that later. Put a short-lived pin in that.
Oh, no.
It will unpin it in this episode.
Oh, no.
There was also another sheet included where the mayor welcomes you to the Twin Peaks Residents Association, and he says that the town motto, which I don't know if we've got this town motto before, is, quote, "You're a stranger here but once." And I know that, like, that's supposed to be, like, inviting. Like, once you've been here once, you're just like family. But it sounds menacing. Like, you're a stranger once, and then you're trapped, you're locked in, you will never leave again. I know that's not the context.
Kalil, you're only a stranger once to me, and then I'll remember you forever.
So that's what I mean. It just got a little bit of a tone, and I know that we're supposed to think Twin Peaks is a nice little town. Everyone keeps telling me that, but the more they tell me that, the more suspicious I get of them. Isn't that weird?
For the greater good.
Also, a document included called Noteworthy Stuff, where just some kind of trivia and information, a lot of which we've had covered before in previous special feature episodes. So if you like that sort of thing and haven't given those episodes a listen, you know, they're somewhere on the internet. I can't tell you where. I don't even know where my shoes are.
Just watch every episode of our podcast all over again. It'll only take you probably a few weeks if you marathon them in a row.
Listener, we're friends, right? What's a few 100 hours between friends? In all seriousness, a lot of it stuff we had before. I don't think we said this one though before. So David Lynch, around the time Twin Peaks was ending, had already started developing a series for Fox TV called American Chronicle, which I think I'd heard the name of before, but never dug much into. And American Chronicle was made with Mark Frost as well. So some information from LynchNet on this. It was a series of documentaries narrated by Richard Dreyfuss, ran for a few episodes, and not all of the episodes aired in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the episodes featured Michael Horse in it. But it was a series of documentaries ranging in topics. Some of them were more obscure, weird oddities of history. And then some of them were more big things. And obviously our brain is kind of maybe going automatically to Mark Frost was involved with this. He would later go on with The Secret History of Twin Peaks. So there was already a history of history being interesting in Mark Frost's history. And they also, I think, we're talking about on the radio at some point here too. So even as Twin Peaks was ending, David Lynch and Mark Frost were already looking at a documentary series and doing on the air. So they had other projects going on at the same time, which I think is kind of important to keep in mind as far as their attention. They still love Twin Peaks. They still speak positively of it, but it wasn't their only TV venture at this moment.
I was just very surprised to hear about the multiple TV ventures because for the most part, you and I were just exploring the film catalog and so on. Did David Lynch go on to make a lot more for TV, or did that just sort of drop off?
That
slowly?
sort of dropped off. I know Mulholland Drive again had been potentially a pilot for a TV show. There's been stuff about that out there floating around as information we've researched. But yeah, On the Air kind of went away pretty quickly.
On the Air went off the air.
On the Air went off the air, and then American Chronicle was pretty quiet. I mean, it aired, but not all the episodes, and no one really talks about it. And I'm not sure how easy it is to even really find that outside of old VHS copies. I don't think you could stream it anywhere. As far as On the Air goes, it is one of those things that I do have available to us that I would be looking at potentially covering in the future if we decide to do such. It's a maybe after the return type of situation. But I haven't seen it myself. I do have it. I know that the actor who plays Dick Tremaine, Ian Buchanan, is a main character in it. And that makes me interested just on the face of it.
Oh, so you haven't seen it yourself
Nope,
yet?
not yet. One day I will.
One day you'll see if he's just as smarmy in that acting role. Imagine a whole
Just as
series
intelligent.
Just imagine how much if we take the character of Dick Tremaine and we try. I don't think this is gonna be the case, but imagine transferring Dick Tremaine into a role of a series and how much Dick Tremaine can carry it. It would be very heavily reliant on the tone. I can see Dick Tremaine existing in the same capacity as late 80s sort of father-led sort of sitcom atmospheres in which he is literally the butt of the joke.
Yeah,
The
I could see
entire-
that. I could see that. And there's some of that stuff in the 90s too, so.
Ah, yeah, some inside the 90s as well, yes.
Yeah.
I think that there was just a point in which, with the renaissance of, more sitcoms, that, yes, you still had the disgruntled father figure, but then slowly you started to explore different avenues. I think that, Malcolm in the Middle, was that, 90s? Or
Late 90s.
Late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, and even Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Roseanne, they were kind of chipping away at the format. You had spin-offs like Frasier off of Cheers doing weird things with their dynamics of family.
And everyone remembers Heil Honey, I'm Home.
Let's not. Speaking of things that didn't happen, to transition that way.
I wish we could scrub it away, but it's already there.
Steven Spielberg was said to be interested in directing a Twin Peaks episode, but that did not happen. Yeah. And then a random other note is that the paintings on the walls of Dr. Jacoby's office are also painted by Russ Tamblyn himself. So the actor painted the paintings that are on the walls.
Yes.
I don't know if we've said that in a previous...
We have.
Oh, well, there you go. Now you know again. I just thought it was such an important detail that changes fundamentally the way we look at Twin Peaks that I wanted to say it again.
It's been reiterated so everyone knows from that small instance from the podcast long ago.
So, looking into the article specifically, there is the special edition, which was given at the conventions. Gives a little taste sampler of different issues and articles from other things. One of which is Behind the Fourth Wall, In Deep with Richard Beymer.
Yeah.
An interview with Richard Beymer, the actor who plays Benjamin
Horn. Yeah.
There we go. That's right. Yeah.
And it's a very nice aptly titled point that where it's a clear divide between the rest of the newspaper to say, hey, Beyond the Fourth Wall, let's look at the actors directly. It's a fun title that is consistent with each of these fourth wall breaking sections. Well, mostly. I
was going to say the other ones don't always acknowledge that it's fourth wall breaking. They just go into it.
I would say it's a firm 60 or 70% to the 40-30 on the other side.
In this interview, Richard Bamer describes David Lynch as being very spontaneous. His ideas are not concrete, but instead allow things to happen and integrate those ideas. So that kind of gels with what we've heard and seen with David Lynch's style before.
Yes.
It's just, David Lynch is that interesting combination of like he desperately wants Final Cut and wants control over his products, but he is not so rigid that, you know, you make one draft and that's what it's going to be. He's constantly improvising and changing things based on weird happy accidents or actor suggestions, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, he's also very specific in his adaptations. So
you noted him as being a rare duck, if you will. No, apparently there's like so much that's very spontaneous about David Lynch's work described here. If he has an idea about the scene, he doesn't want it to be concrete. He allows things to just sort of like happen, and it allows him to integrate. It seems like a very fluid nature through it. David Lynch just seems to trust the actors, as Richard Bamer would say. And there's actually some good overall insight with Richard Bamer himself when he considers media, including media that he's been involved with and he's created. Stylistically, a lot of his work deals more so with a documentary of nature, as he sort of describes. It's spontaneous. It is something that whatever happens in front of the camera to evolve naturally. And so gelling with David Lynch makes a lot of sense for Bamer and how he sort of like talks about him.
I feel like Richard Bamer really got Twin Peaks. And you know, it depends on the cast member, what they actually thought was going on and what they, you know, perceived and where they were. But I think Richard Bamer understood the heart of it pretty well. And he speaks in the interview about the darkness in the series, but also how it was woven into metaphor and dreams and how it always worked with sort of lightness and humor. He seemed to understand the balancing act of Twin Peaks and seemed to understand what the appeal was in a way that, yeah, I see why creatively he would gel with David Lynch and Mark Frost's vision for the show. So I thought that was a pretty neat interview.
It was very neat.
We also get the log lady talking and answering questions about the log in a section called Ask the Log. Curiously, it is said by Catherine Coulson. If that's to be believed, that means that the actor who played the log lady wrote this for the official fan magazine. Making her, I think, don't quote me on this, I think the only actor credited as writing something in this. We have a character credited as writing multiple articles.
Yes.
But I think this is the only actor. So when it says by Catherine Coulson, I'm taking that literally right now. I don't know, because it doesn't say Margaret Coulson. It says Catherine Coulson. Anyway, asked if the log is male or female. Catherine Coulson, replying as the log lady, responds, neither.
It's a log.
It is a log. And also, it is specifically a ponderosa pine. Again, the Secret History changed that. Did retcon that into a Douglas fir.
If this is truly written by Catherine Coulson, the person who plays the log lady, to then have that sort of like swat down, it's like, no, your log is wrong. I find a deep humor in that.
Deep offense. No, I in my headcanon, it's ponderosa pine. I take the consistency of, you know, it being the ponderosa pine in the show, in the actor's opinion, and in multiple of, like, I think it was in either in Laura Palmer's diary, the cards, it said ponderosa pine. Probably the cards. I've heard it enough that I'm like, I'm inclined to believe that it's a ponderosa pine and that Mark Frost either is wrong or alternate universe. But in my heart, there is a ponderosa pine log in my heart. Help, doctor. Help. There's a log in my heart.
You know, the only doctor that can handle it inside this realm is Dr. Hayward, so.
The article, the log lady / Catherine Coulson, goes on to say that trees may or may not have feelings, but they do have hormones. Make of that what you will.
Oh, I made of it what I will in the first issue. Trust me, I made with it. There's some sexy material inside these newspaper folks. I'm just letting you know. There's some really sexy material.
And she also describes the log as being a gift from her late husband. Just the term gift I thought was interesting in terms of how the actor perceives the log's relationship. It is not a curse. It is not a cross. It is not a constant reminder of her sadness. It is a gift. It is a beneficial thing. Because usually gift is a positively aligned word. I don't think she was being sarcastic in that answer of saying it was a gift from my, like, no, I think she's saying like, it's a good thing. It keeps her company. It gives her insight.
At this point, like, you could make almost like a game show out of the idea of gift and damn. It's like, and the log is Is the log gifted or damned?
Well, it's usually both. So, I mean,
Usually both.
That's a terrible game show idea.
It's a horrible game
You're
show.
almost always never going to get it right. I don't know.
Or you're always going to get it right.
I don't
but
know.
in some capacity.
It's both. Congratulations. Included also in the special edition is the What's Up Doc, written by Russ Tamblyn, which is the actor again. So I literally just got done saying it was the only one written by an actor. And right down in my notes below was another one. This is why you don't listen to me, okay? This is why you got to look
You shouldn't listen to the people on your podcast.
shouldn't listen to me. So, okay, Russ Tamblyn did write this, supposedly, so he's not the only. Catherine Coulson also wrote there. There's probably billions more I'm not thinking of.
Can we just find a humor that we have literally 2 Ask articles to 2 different characters? One is directly at him, for what we will go deeper into as like advice, like psychological advice from Jacoby, and the other one is like, hey guys, just talk to my log. Just please talk to my log.
And the questions that Russ Tamblyn is receiving are being given by people who clearly are not like their normal names, they're puns. So we get Wes Stories, like West Side Story, writes in about their life being a mess. Their sister lives for Leo. Not explained which Leo we're talking about here. Brother wears a dress. Parents are both swingers, and they themselves can't get a date.
You know what? Good for the brother and the, but I feel like this person's kind of really pushing it onto that negative angle.
Yeah, Jacoby recommends getting a piece of wood as the solution, because if everyone had wood, they'd just be better off.
I mean, it seems like the parents are having wood and having a great time, so.
I don't know what to make of it. This person seems to be projecting, because, like, I don't know the context. Like, okay, if the sister lives for Leo Johnson, that might be a bad thing, because Leo Johnson seems like an unhealthy person to be obsessed with. You might want to find other things to live for that aren't Leo Johnson specifically. Mm-hmm. Unless you're just, in the universe of our world, a fan of the TV show Twin Peaks, and identify Leo as a bad character, but you like villain characters, I guess that's fine then. I mean, that's okay. You can like whatever character you want. But if it's Leo Johnson in real Twin Peaks, because it's in Twin Peaks, I don't know. Or is it a different Leo?
Where do we draw the line?
I don't know. It's a dotted line no matter how we draw it, for sure. I don't know. It's just this person's projecting because they're lonely and they're blaming it on their family. But it's like, you know what? It's not their problem.
Let your brother look fucking fantastic.
Yeah, let your parents go ride the swings. You know, why are you telling them what playground equipment they can use? Dang it. Then we get a letter from Horticulture asking if plants need psychiatry. And Jacoby says, 2 do for certain, the narcissus and the loco weed.
Ha!
You want to do a laugh track on the...
I did do the laugh track. It was from my voice. So you want the artificial one?
Yeah.
The fake one.
The real.
Also, my mouth isn't good enough for you. Wait. Do you want laughter or
Laughter.
rim shot?
Laughter.
It's rim shot, though. I can do the rim shot.
That's pretty good. Laughter, though, still. So long.
It slowly dies. It dies so nicely.
Oh, okay. Someone named Puzzled asks for the meaning of life. And Jacoby responds, "It's a mystery to me." That's it. That's
Good
his
job.
response. I mean, what are you supposed to say to that question?
How are you supposed to do anything with that? But still, it's very charming. Now, I gotta say, with this special issue, like with all these sort of like scattered articles, there's still more samplings that are located across it. There's like even like if I'm not mistaken, there was also like a nice recipe, which recipes are found throughout the overall issues. But still, these were the direct lines between the audience for the paper as well as the paper itself to spin off these fun things. And as far as the option, if this paper continued into this present day, if you will. Years and years of Twin Peaks Gazette. Kalil, who would you rather write to? Who would you rather write to? Would you rather have a written to the log or to good old Dr. Jacoby?
See, I'm not sure if we're supposed to believe that these were actually asked by real people. I mean, obviously real people wrote the questions. Whether it was like a writer for the Gazette who wrote the questions, or if they did get an outside question, I don't know.
You don't know, but it does offer that option, like, say, right into Dr. Jacoby from the very first issue. So if you still have the option, this book is, these papers are telling you to write in. So who would you write into in hopes that maybe one day you would get advice from?
Who are my options?
Dr. Jacoby or the Log.
Just those two?
Those are the two that it says to write in.
I'm
going by the terms
I could write
of the
to the
Gazette.
editors.
But the Gazette is asking you to write to them.
I would write to Jacoby.
You write to Jacoby?
Before the Log, yeah. Yeah.
What pressing questions would you have?
I mean,
for
if
Jacoby?
It was pressing, it would...
Because again, this is asking for psychological help for yourself. So he's giving you psychological analysis.
I have no idea right now. I'd have to think about that long and hard and consult my own log to answer the question about the not log.
I would ask him what sort of time might be able to invoke my spirit enough in order to better understand myself. Because I have a hard time understanding me.
Well, someone wrote to the letters for the editor in issue 1 that Dr. Jacoby really flips her skirt. So that might give you context for your question.
Yeah, indeed. Which I will also add on to. I find a lot of humor with the Dr. Jacoby segment. I wonder how long it would have lasted, personally, because this is literally in a campy tone asking if you wanted to send for psychiatric help.
Yeah.
And none of these were helpful. I'm just wondering if there would be anyone in an official capacity sweating bullets at any point that people are sending in their psychiatric questions in hopes.
Yeah,
of
I mean, that
answers.
could happen, but it's weird. Like, I don't know how much they'd weed out the questions because going back to the letter to the editor for issue number 1, the very first question that they ever show in letters to the editor
Yes.
is, again, they presumably could, choose what questions to publish. They published someone who was asking the paper to go more into, the actors, which is fine. Then they say specifically Machen Amick. Like, okay, well, I mean, she's a good actor. It makes sense.
Yep.
Specifically her footwear. Just to find out if she walks barefoot, if she wears socks. And then, the person writing this is like, hey, by the way, if there's any shoes that she wore on the show and they're for sale, just kind of, let me know. And it's like, listen, bud. It's okay. It's okay to find someone attractive. It's okay to find the actor attractive. It's okay to be into feet. We're not going to kink shame you.
No, not at all.
Please do not solicit the fan magazine to go into the private lives of the cast and get feet pics for you, sir. That was the very first one they chose for letters to the editor.
You'd get from this, and I gotta say, it's an
impression.
It's an impression.
A foot-shaped impression in the sand of time.
Enjoy what you enjoy, folks. Just please
Respect the
respect
boundaries.
the boundaries of people you don't know, and don't go to third parties for your feet pics.
Is the Gazette a third party? It's a second party? I don't even know what it is party-wise.
It's a party and a half. It's the Lion King 1.5 of parties.
Yeah.
They comment, and sometimes it's in the real world, and sometimes it's not.
And I'm really glad Lion King 1.5 did not have more feet moments, so I'm content with this, really. In issue number 1, right at the cover, pretty much the first thing you're likely to notice is Agent Cooper makes Black Tie's best-dressed FBI list with a big old picture of Agent Cooper. So this list was made in 1990, and apparently it is not easy to make this list because most FBI agents tend to dress alike, and, the subtleties of their style are not easily detected by the untrained eye. But fret not, Mr. Black Tie is able to do it. In universe, Mr. Black Tie is a character who supposedly looks at the FBI suits,
So he
and
is
he
a
makes
character.
a list. That's my assumption.
Okay.
Because he's talking about Agent Cooper's pajamas, meaning that this person has access to what Cooper's pajamas look like. I don't know if Cooper sent in photos of himself, like selfies in the mirror. Hopefully Bob wasn't in the reflection, sending his pajama pics
Is
over
he
to...
describing his pajamas to Diane through the tapes? Like, Diane, today I am in a singular bunny onesie.
I don't know. If there is a real thing with Mr. Black Tie, I'm not aware of it. It's kind of confusing because, again, this person is commenting on the apparel of characters in the show, and as though, like, they literally have the access to see what these people's garments look like, including not even their regular outfits out in public. And also, FBI agents tend to be undercover.
Yeah, this person
Not
from
public.
the FBI, potentially, unless it's just like some from Twin Peaks who has FBI access, basically goes straight in, looks at all the individuals and say, you have a nice suit, you need some work.
Now, Gordon Cole made the list as well, just not as high as Dale Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
And then Agent Denise Bryson did not make the list. The article refers to Denise as he, and also refers to Denise as a cross-dresser, which, again, we've talked before on the show that it doesn't seem like Twin Peaks was very clear on if this character is meant to be perceived as transgender, at the time probably would have been called transsexual, or if it's meant to be a cross-dressing character. Either way is fine. It's just that I don't know which one the show's going for. The article's going with cross-dresser, I guess. And Denise did not make the list due to uneven hemlines, plunging necklines, and instead of being put on the best dress, was put on the 10 worst dressed list, to which Agent Bryson had comments, but they were unprintable due to the, I guess, severity and maybe vulgarity of these comments. What do you think of the best dressed list, having Cooper at the top, Gordon Cole somewhere in the lower of the top 10 probably, and then Denise Bryson in the top 10 worst?
It's something that I think sets the tone for the most part of the magazine. It is literally the headlining article. It is right at the front of the page. Technically, the big information off to the left side, just like sort of like describing what the article is just like off to the side from this like much larger article. So it sets the tone. Still, as always, Denise Bryson is very difficult to talk about, mostly because I don't know how to feel about what's coming through with Denise, other than the fact that inside this canon that Denise had something to say and went into the full amount of details of probably along the lines of screw you.
Is that in the character? Because I don't feel like we got any indication.
This is the other Denise Bryson at the FBI.
Yeah, sure.
And this
I don't know if we got any indication that Denise like is crude or like vulgar or says comments that like would be in anger.
We haven't seen anyone in opposition. For the most part, the show kind of just like had some glances, paused on things, and then just sort of like moved on. It didn't say anything big. So since Denise did not have any sort of like opposing forces that went against them, that's where the complication comes into what would happen if there was.
So it's possible.
Possible.
Do you think true love was possible between Dougie Milford and Lana Milford?
No.
But they got married.
Do you want me to say it again? No.
So we get some backstory a little bit on that too, where Lana worked briefly as a reporter on the rodeo taxidermy beat for the Gazette during her whirlwind courtship with Mr. Milford. So this positions Lana as being a writer for the Gazette in a strange capacity around the time that she was courting the Douglas.
Courting the Douglas.
I don't know if it was ever stated in the show. I don't know if it was ever stated in the show that Lana worked for the Gazette, but sure. Okay. I mean, it makes sense how she'd have access to Dougie then, the editor. And also, while I was reading this, I realized the irony that if Lana really did assassinate Dougie, as we've kind of teased before, that would mean that Dwayne Milford was right. When he was pointing the gun and saying that Lana was a murderer and she should be charged with murder and she's an assassin, he called that out. That means that if we do believe, Professor, that Lana actually was a hired hit on Dougie because of the events of Secret History, that means that Dwayne Milford was right the whole time. Are you willing to let that happen?
I literally felt that like it is much more entertaining for me to have this person come out as like this strange assassin, if you will, as she goes off on her little killing path. Like there's a humor to just having her just be an absolute nobody. But I genuinely think that the fact that they went so wild with a Secret History, that she could be this overall great assassin that was like sent down because of like his like huge past. I think that's where it gets a pass. Thing is that Secret History Twin Peaks wasn't out around this time, so if I saw that would be extremely uncompelling to me. It'd be like, oh yeah.
So the Secret History might vindicate Dwayne posthumously. Also, apparently Dougie and Dwayne have a sister named Dottie. That's never
Dougie,
showed up.
Dottie.
It never showed up in the Secret History.
We keep learning about like individuals that are like, it makes sense because I have family members that I never bring up for this podcast right here. And I know for a fact that I haven't really even like brought up my siblings to you in the first place, and we've been good friends for some time.
Yeah.
Like not bringing them up, they're not around. That makes sense, but it's still a little bit jarring to hear. Is like, yes, Dottie, one of my favorite Twin Peaks individuals, mostly because like the perspective looking down upon the show as we sort of like comb it for more and more information. You'd expect Dottie to show up for the funeral, but maybe not.
I don't think Dottie exists. Just gonna be honest with you.
Gonna put a dot on Dottie.
I don't think she's not acknowledged by any other piece of Twin Peaks material.
She was probably inside the background at the funeral, maybe. I don't know.
Do you think she exists in your headcanon? Does Dottie Milford exist?
Dottie exists as much as Truman's brother and Jacoby's brother to me.
I disagree with that for myself, only because I think of the Gazette versus the Secret History as having different weight. So to me, when the Gazette acknowledges Dottie in like a sentence and doesn't describe her at all, whereas the Twin Peaks, Secret History of Twin Peaks goes into more detail about the character of Frank Truman. Not a ton, mind you, but enough to establish a history of this character.
Very well.
I'm more inclined to believe the Secret History that in that universe, at least, if there's a parallel universe or whatever, there is a character named Frank Truman who is the brother, whereas this is just some random reference to Dottie, and it doesn't seem to be like written by any of the people involved in the show.
Maybe this is where they collabed. Maybe it was specifically only this part where David Lynch and Mark Frost collabed and said, no, you have to include Dottie. Dottie is an intricate character to Twin Peaks at this time and must be known.
It was in the agreement that we didn't have in the legal papers that in order to make this newspaper happen, there was one caveat that David Lynch and Mark Frost unilaterally demanded that they have Dottie. So when they told them, be careful what you're in for, make sure you sign on the Dottie line. Then Poor Unfortunate Souls started playing in the background.
Beautiful.
Thanks. Mill burning creates a new economy. We get an optimistic article. On the face of it.
On the mill burning.
On the mill burning, hey man.
Notably, one of the big lead-up events inside Twin Peaks where this is a horrible thing that happens and we don't really dig deep into it, but other than that, it's usually known as like when you have a place in which people's jobs are at or is like a huge point of property, unless you are in any sort of like receiving end of insurance or just trying to get things out of the way, this is usually not a good thing. But no, we get a lighthearted note saying that, you know what?
The former employees have, been glad to have time with their families.
Yep, glad to have time with their families. They can pick up new work for themselves, entrepreneurs, in fact, or new hobbies and so on. Isn't that wonderful that when you lose your job, you can suddenly spend more time with your families and pick up new hobbies? I'm so glad we didn't read this in 2020 and make this podcast in 2020, because this would be all the more upsetting. For obvious reasons.
Some of them decided they kind of liked unemployment. It is interesting because I think it's done for a sense of sarcasm and ironic humor. But if we do take this supposedly to be the actual newspaper of Twin Peaks, that means that they published this newspaper to the town where families would have lost their jobs, and that we know that the mills were like the number one source of employment in the town. So, hey, everyone, I know it sucks, but also, isn't it kind of great? It feels like a wrong tone. And then it's, again, more of the sort of almost toxic positivity of Twin Peaks where we just smile and sweep anything bad under the bar table.
As long as there is a situation where one man can look at a moose head and say, I want to make that into a humidifier.
Yeah.
At the very least, we have that. And there is context for a moose head humidifier that continues on as a joke into the next issue that...
It is a funny idea.
It's a funny idea. It's a funny image regardless, but it comes from a place of absolute misery.
Sheriff Truman and the FBI are investigating the possibility that maybe there's arson involved in the mills burning.
What?
But we never have any indication they charge anyone, right? Like no indication in Secret History or in the show or even in this newspaper. So
the best job that they end up doing law-wise is taking down Jean Renault. Other than that, I'm trying to think of how much law work really goes on around Twin Peaks. They took care of a man in Canada.
Yeah, just promote Hawk to sheriff and just see if things do get done a little better.
What, you don't think Truman, the everyman, the one man with the cowboy hat is not doing a good enough job for you?
I think he's pretty good. I just think Hawk does most of the work.
He's taking care of those raccoons by Josie's house every night to protect our town of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, so everyone can sleep better tonight. Yeah, someone who's sleeping better tonight. Anyway, in the article, suddenly I understood everything. We get more moose content of a different variety. This is an article that I took a snapshot of and put on our Twitter page. So if you're so inclined, that's Snake Eye Dreams 1. The numeral 1 is in 1 12-foot moose.
There is and mighty moose off there in Twin Peaks.
First thing is you see this picture of a moose. It's like a drawn image of this giant moose.
Big, cross-legged, holding
smoking
onto
a pipe, legs crossed, looking all casual thinkery.
Fancy.
And there's this guy named Chuck Tools. That's his name. Chuck Tools.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't think of how funny it is until I said it either. We took a walk in the woods, and Chuck found that suddenly, may I call you Charles? I'll call him Charles. He suddenly understood everything, including the future of the world, the subtle structure of the universe, and the purpose of mankind. Charles had, in fact, found a 12-foot moose that spoke to him without speaking and told him to tell these things to the newspaper. Even if it ruined Charles's reputation, even if it made people think that he is mad and that he is not a responsible librarian, as we know Charles to be.
Which, yes, it does go into detail of his overall medical history, the fact that he's a well-respected overall librarian and a figure that would not usually say these overall things. He's not someone that the community, or at the very least the writer of the community, would recognize as roving mad or anything like that. He feels that he has legitimately seen a 12-foot moose.
Usually the word's raving mad. Roving mad sounds like they're on the move.
They're
madness,
the
but they got places to go. Like, we're just cycling a triathlon
work things
over.
out as they're overall working with that moose. And this article has got to go because as we learn more about this moose, and it goes deeper into the details of the moose, and it's telling us the answers of the universe of the moose, it just says, for this article to continue, please turn to page 9. How did you like page 9, Kalil?
I think it can't be described with words.
Mm-hmm.
It filled me with a sense of emptiness, first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. And why was that, Kalil?
Because it's not there.
It's not
there.
there
Is no page 9.
There's 8 pages. The 8th page is literally more competitions like The Gifted and the Damned.
It's very
as
playful.
well as the article that overall deals with, like, if you want to order any of these items, which, by the way, you can order, like, a t-shirt, you could order yourself a mug. It says that various things are sold out, so if you really wanted some lingerie from One-Eyed Jacks, unfortunately, that is sold out. As well as in the next issue, like the Moose Humidifier, you can't quite get quite yet.
Given the connotations of One-Eyed Jacks being like, what it is, and usually the, demographic of the clientele.
John Reno's dead at this time, so at this point, who knows who's running the business? Maybe that was like a clearance sale. Like, it's like, well, now operations, we killed the bosses. The bosses are dead. Like, what happens to the Koopas after Bowser drowns in lava? They have to, at that point, retire and then sell their shells.
There's always another Bowser. It always comes back. Sometimes Bowser Jr. is in charge. You never know how it's going to work. I would think headcanon, because we don't know any better, I would assume Jerry's still taking care of it. Even when Ben was doing Civil War stuff, I would believe Jerry
died at the end of the series,
okay,
remember?
Sure, yeah,
he died from the chef.
We have never found the body.
We've never found the body after that. He went to
But also,
complain.
no one has ever referred to Jerry again. We just don't acknowledge him. Anyway, I just want to highlight the quote before it goes to the invisible page 9 that doesn't exist. Because it says at the bottom of the article, quote, and this is Chuck Tools' perspective, quote, but, this is one informed moose. And I realize I have a responsibility to share what I know to be extremely surprising. And then it cuts.
You know what is extremely surprising?
What?
Spontaneous human combustion.
Spontaneous human combustion.
It's very surprising when someone, suddenly lights up in flame.
At Bambi's.
Famous Twin Peaks location, Bambi's.
Anton Kabanov, age 54, was found dead at Bambi's bed and breakfast. Victim of a rare natural phenomenon known as spontaneous human combustion. He had been a guest staying at the Bambi's Bread and Breakfast, the Triple B, for 13 days. Breakfast. And then he burned alive, and it's not funny. Stop laughing, a man died.
I'm sorry, but Fire is walking with us, man, as he's suddenly caught into flame and moving. I mean, for, the fun themes and the mystique of, Twin Peaks, there's a reason for this article to be here. Other than that, it just seems like a random article. But I still love the fact that, they're literally yeah, this man just, caught onto flame. All right, moving on.
the person who saw this, the witness or whatever, mentioned that, it was awful. He was burned like a pile of ash. But hey, on the positive side, his beautiful clothes were not burned.
Honestly, as far as
it's really nice clothes. They go on about how nice those clothes are too.
My God, it's like, is it just like in the tone of at least this variant of Twin Peaks that it's okay to keep like brushing things aside? Always look on the bright side, like always look on the bright side.
Yeah,
of
it's
life.
weird. Like it reads as like dark satire, but the town is supposedly a happy, good place. But everything we keep seeing sounds like terrible things are happening, and they just smile like a dystopian nightmare. Everything's fine in Twin Peaks.
Just eat your joy and everything's fine.
Eat your cherry pie. Things like that. Apparently, the fire must have been around 3,000 degrees to reduce him into that 10-pound pile of ash. And the only other thing that was affected, other than him, was an electric shaver that was slightly melted.
Anything to say about the electric shaver?
Electricity.
Well, his clothes were the electricity?
His shaver conducted the electricity into his flesh and then incinerated him. Zap.
Zippity-doo-dah.
Maybe he offended the lodge spirits. In some really obscure way.
Did he chase after the lodge spirits with a razor?
The giant showed up to him and said, "You will stay at the bread and breakfast for 12 days and no longer." And then he stayed for the 13th day.
No.
Lucky number 13. And they buzzed him. They gave him a buzz.
They buzzed him. That's gotta be my favorite new way of like offing someone in context. Like if I ever have to write a character, it's like, yeah, seems the man got buzzed.
Okay, look, it's an electric shaver, so it goes buzz, and then also it's electricity sparking a fire. It's buzz, buzz. We get a recurring segment in these 3 issues called The Roving Eye, where different people are interviewed as part of this editorial, I guess we'll say. It's a little ongoing series. And we get this interview with Professor Chatterjee, who has lived in Twin Peaks for 6 months and is renowned for his Ask Chatterjee column, which does appear in the newspaper as well. And he is said to expound the wisdom of the East and is from India. Obviously, it's a character that is not seen anywhere else in Twin Peaks material. He is an exclusive to the Gazette. So if you're a huge fan of Professor Chatterjee, this is where you find him.
Yeah, apparently this individual is Chatterjee, that is. Very tapped in to the...
Also, it's a roving eye, not a raving eye, just to clarify.
But no, apparently, like, this individual, Chatterjee, is very connected with the spiritual world. He is very insightful. If you enjoy, like, Cooper's musings through, like, various interests of other cultures and other styles and other things, like, it's a fun trivia section that Ask Chatterjee is. But this specifically roving eye is literally interviewing someone who actively works for the paper. And as far as Chatterjee is concerned, apparently, like, and between Chatterjee and the person who wrote the roving eye, who was that again?
I don't know.
Someone wrote the roving eye. It's a consistent piece of the paper that happens again and again. There's a new character.
You think I'm going to write down the name?
We just remember Chatterjee. It's a fun name. Anyway, apparently, like, Chatterjee, in order to impress upon him of his belief inside of the overall strangeness of the world, he actually is able to use some form of ability to bend a spoon, bend the chrome off of a jukebox, as well as the management.
Okay, that's what I thought, but then I reread it and I got a different interpretation. So the way it's worded is that the interviewer asks Chatterjee if he can bend spoons. And Chatterjee kind of looks at him and then laughs suddenly like a madman. That's when the spoon goes flying. So my understanding is that the guy had a spoon in his hand. He was like, "Can you bend a spoon?"
Oh, and he chucked it at the chrome of the jukebox?
No. The man laughed so loud that the guy holding the spoon flung his own spoon back and hit the jukebox. That was my understanding of the article.
And that's a much more entertaining interpretation.
Because it's just like,
I love that.
ha, 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 whoa! It just startled him with the laugh so badly that it caused this chain of events that probably got it kicked out of the double R.
Yes, that is beautiful. No. I think that's a much better interpretation of it, too.
I also think if you go to this, like, wise man who is supposed to have all this wisdom, and he's from India, and you ask him, "Can you bend a spoon?" you deserve to get laughed at.
Yes.
That's not a very good question to ask the man.
Absolutely.
I also just want to mention it for the sake of it. I don't know where this would go, but when I hear the roving eye, it makes me think of Henry David Thoreau. Well, no, it's Ralph Waldo Emerson. Is it Emerson? It's Emerson, right? The transparent eyeball.
Why were you pointing at Shadow the Hedgehog?
Romantic.
You were pointing at Shadow the Hedgehog while you were figuring that out. I'm the other talk show host here, not Shadow the Hedgehog.
I'm Googling it, and it's Emerson. My bad, it's not Thoreau. I get my romantics confused, okay? Sue me. Don't sue me. Please don't. But it reminds me of Emerson.
While we're still onto the double R, just for a mild tangent, if you will, speaking of food in a mild way.
Eyeballs food.
There are recipes through each of the overall books themselves. And books, papers, the newspapers, issues. And I have issues with these recipes. The third one is funny because in the third issue, we get the carrot cake from Richard Bamer's character, Benjamin Horn. Benjamin Horn's carrot cake, haha, funny, he's eating carrots now. Still, it's actually a nice-looking recipe. I'd like to try it sometime. It's just the strangeness of, the first two, because I believe the second issue has horns, but specifically on the first one, which is the same issue that we're currently on at this time, is that it's served on a bed of pine needles.
Yeah.
And have you ever, lived next to evergreens or pine needles before? They're... from
I wouldn't want them in my mouth.
From my experience, it seems to be decorative and it's supposed to be served on it, but they get everywhere.
Yeah. It'd be awful.
Would you like a taste of nature spackled onto your delicious
stabbing into your
log
gums.
loaf?
Yeah,
log
thank
loaf.
you. No, thank you.
Delicious log loaf.
Really, I'll pass. Amidst the real interviews with real people and interviews of well-known fictional characters, we get interviews with unknown new fictional characters that exist only in the Gazette, to my knowledge.
Yes.
So we get an article titled "Local Girl Wins Literary Award," and we find out about this 13-year-old girl named Mohetta Jones, and she writes under the name Marcia Kite. In an interview, it is firmly established that she says Martha is the author, not Mohetta. She will not answer questions about the book under the name Mohetta, only under the pen name Marcia. But it seems like it's more than a pen name the more the conversation goes on. It's hard to know the lines in this. If we're meant to take, there is another entity or mind or spirit in her, dissociative identity, or if she's a 13-year-old who's very much into her, fan fiction-y headcanon.
Yeah, which, out of just plain curiosity here, Kalil.
Yeah.
What was the name of Norma's sister that has now long disappeared into the aether, the hole in Twin Peaks?
You mean Annie?
No, not Norma. I'm sorry. Could you tell me what is the name of Donna's younger sister that was disappeared
Harriet.
into the aether and just forever gone? I'm
Harriet.
looking at that. I'm looking at the established poet and someone that would be fun to have a pen name like this. Because
and
at
around
first
the
I was
same
thinking,
age.
maybe they're a pen name. But no, they make it clear this is a separate character around the same age with their own personal pen name and style.
Yeah.
It's this would have been, did you have someone like this?
I don't know why. I don't know. I at first thought it was going to be Harriet, but no, there's no indication that it's Harriet.
It's
a different local 13-year-old.
Local 13-year-old that's really into writing.
Which I'm okay. I don't want to overuse all the characters in Twin Peaks. I'm okay
I don't
with
want to
new
overuse
concepts.
it, but this is still a Twin Peaks Gazette, and unless they're going to continue on this character in some capacity, which maybe they plan
maybe they would have.
But as far as it's being told right here, is I would rather have the alternative of use the tools that you have rather than crafting brand new tools off of your hand in order to establish these things. This Gazette seems and it is still taking these opportunities as a fun point of exploration. But as we continue down this realm of exploration, there's a lot of very safety net sort of situations they put themselves in, as in they won't go far enough to write a lot of new established things whenever it comes to established characters. For the most part, it seems very status quo heavy, fitting for the tone of Twin Peaks, but still very much in that realm of you're gonna get likely what you expect.
I think more the tie-in is less the character being, someone from the show, and more the ideas and themes and kind of moods of this interview being parallel to elements of the show. Because again, whether you interpret it to be an actual other spirit or just this edgy 13-year-old very insistent upon this alternate name, there is this idea of duality happening. There's also some interesting commentary here on fiction where she says that if something can be imagined, it really is out there. And we can only imagine it because it truly exists. It's some hardcore, I don't know, not even Plato, I think, would go that far. But we're going to the idea that any fictional idea is real, and we're just tapping into that reality for a moment almost. That's a curious thing to put forward, I think, in Twin Peaks, particularly, and in a fan magazine of Twin Peaks, no less. So there's that interesting idea. What do you make of that mentality that if something can be imagined, it is in some way real?
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are.
Disney, please do not strike us. Please, Disney.
I wasn't that good. That was a cover. I'm allowed.
Yeah.
So, no, it's very much that very Jeremy Cricket sort of mentality. Jiminy?
Jiminy.
Jeremy? I watched the bootleg of Pinocchio.
James T. Cricket.
James T. Cricket.
Gosh, dang.
But no,
what I'm working with here.
It's that very overall hopeful, if you think it will come like a wish upon that star mentality.
I don't say it's necessarily a positive thing.
It's not a positive thing, no.
That means nightmares you can imagine.
But I think
Stephen
it comes
King.
off as like this trying to be positive, but the truth behind it, and especially with the context we have behind it, it's not that positive.
It means that the darkest things you can imagine are also in some way real. All of Lovecraft's fiction is real.
Yes.
So I don't take it to be positive or negative. I take it to be a neutral statement.
Okay.
And the character seems to just say it very factually, like this is just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the interview, there's kind of this back and forth that I want to highlight, where the interviewer says, "I understand your heroine looks a lot like you." And then response, "She looks like Mohetta. They both have the same face. They have the same facial handicap." And it's clarified that they both have a birthmark.
Mm-hmm.
And Marcia, again, that's the one speaking right now, says they were separated surgically at birth. And the interviewer's like, "I see." And then Marcia responds, "No, I'm afraid you do not." And then it just ends. And so there's this kind of odd idea being put in here of the main character in the book having the same birthmark as the actual 13-year-old girl, Mohetta, and Marcia speaking on behalf of both of them. So if we take Marcia at her word, right? Marcia's the real author writing about the surgically removed, like, twin character of the real person, Mohetta.
Yes.
There's some weird things going on for this to be a one-off story, for this never to have been continued in issue 2 and 3.
Or it could be something that's sort of like striking up the tone for, say, for example, the newspaper itself. The blend between the fiction and nonfiction and how the mindsets sort of go in. It's a great thing to put inside the very first issue for this reason, but no, I absolutely do agree. I think that this feels like it would be continued, but it is not. It just ends.
I like the idea. I think it's interesting. I read it with interest. I was inclined to be wanting more. If they would have continued the plotline, I would have been interested. But it's kind of just a dropped idea. Issue number 2 comes along, and this one you mentioned before, it focuses a lot more on Coop. Citizens opposed to the offing of Peaks.
No, it is a heavy, heavy tone shift inside of Coop. Mostly in regards to, it's an opening where on the headline, it talks more about Coop and trying to get the show overall back. Again, a very strange opening, especially considering the last one taking a character from Twin Peaks and emphasizing the character. So very much, it's save the show, save the show, save the show through the tone of the second issue. Send your letters to Bob Iger. Please, please, please. And most notably, I would say, one of the sort of like fan interactions, or presumed fan interactions that would have gone into the paper, were these Citizen of the Month awards, if you will. The first issue had one. The second issue has 3. So instead of being something that seems to be more so of a fan interaction, they instead put the 3 individuals that are highly behind Coop as the combined Citizen of the Month, with an interesting like runner-up being like this fun little family doing a cool cosplay of Twin Peaks, literally putting their daughter and wrapping her into plastic. I think she was like 4 years old or 6 years old, if I'm not mistaken.
Fun family exercise.
But
gonna look weird in hindsight.
A fun family dynamic of like cosplaying, but still, you could see like there were people who were like submitting in like pictures of themselves and just more so excitement of this and potentially want to be Citizens of the Month, and that's just overridden. If I'm not mistaken, I don't recall, or at the very least it was in a section that might have glazed past my eye, but I don't think the third issue has Citizen of the Month. So the first issue has 1 Citizen of the Month. The second issue has 3 with a runner-up. So this could have been like a lengthy segment and then completely dropped for the third issue. It's this magazine feels like it's dying.
Right away.
Yep.
Right away. It had 1 normal issue. And then, things are already falling apart. One of the very, very first articles on the front page is the Give Twin Peaks a Chance headline.
Does not help.
No, it sets the tone. And David Lynch and Mark Frost are interviewed for this. And they do suggest that they would pursue other networks if ABC canceled the series.
Oh, man.
Which is something I don't know if I've run into in our previous research. I don't know if anyone's ever said anything about that. But they are making that idea out there that, yeah, we'll contact like NBC. We would go to another network and switch the show. But did that ever get to any stage? I don't think so. I never heard anything about that.
So what you're telling me is that there's still a chance for Twin Peaks season 3. They're still looking for networks to this very day.
They made Twin Peaks The Return, and whether that counts or not, you'll have to tell me later. And again, they're urging people to write to Bob Iger of ABC Entertainment. Mark Frost acknowledged that everything is finite in life and when creative works, but he did say that they would like to continue with Twin Peaks for a long time. So again, just by this point, we're like we're in like the mid-20s of season 2. Like we're toward the end. Like this is probably when Annie was already introduced. If I had to ballpark a guess here, we are near this point, and Mark Frost is still speaking with the idea that they want to continue for a long time. And David Lynch said that he still loves doing Twin Peaks. He has new story ideas that interest him, and he is not soured on doing television. I bring these things up and emphasize them because I feel like we sometimes get the idea otherwise, where David Lynch will say that he basically wasn't involved after they revealed the killer. The show got bad. It seems like David Lynch almost disowned a lot of it. And then we get information like this where he's like, right with Mark Frost saying, nope, got new ideas, love it, let's keep doing it.
And that might have been the case for some time. Like they were talking to themselves and there might have been some form of revigoration. Some of these feel contradictory, but on the other realm, like I think that there is the broad day-to-day life that's always needs to be considered. That's like things might have been more muddled and gray as we continue digging deeper, especially with notes such as these. And to recognize, I don't know necessarily the background information. I'm sure you'll have plenty of trivia for me when we get to that crossroads. But at the end of the day, David Lynch did return to Twin Peaks. David Lynch did come back. I don't know if it was initiated from external forces being like, hey, David Lynch, you remember Twin Peaks, would you like to go? Or if there was like a sense of wanting to pursue or these ideas coming through that he contacted, I think it was like the Bravo network that like it was
Showtime.
Showtime. Like, how do those communications go through? I don't know personally. You might know personally. But still, regardless, there's still a chance that, like, David Lynch still was interested in some form of capacity. So I find these interviews both very interesting for insight of the day, but also take it very much in the regard of the day. You and I talked extensively about Inland Empire as like the biggest example of something in which like David Lynch's mentality or thoughts or even like memory seems to have shifted over the years with it, which makes sense. My memory shifts
I just think it's interesting to acknowledge that even though David Lynch would say in later interviews that he didn't like the rest of the show, he tuned out a lot of it, he wasn't watching all of it, he wasn't engaged with it, the show ended badly. When it was actually airing in the end of season 2, he was speaking positively of it. And we have every reason to believe that the season 2 ending was meant to be a cliffhanger to get a season 3. They've repeatedly made that clear that like they were hoping to continue going. This wasn't a big F you to the network for revealing who killed Laura Palmer. I think it was a last-ditch effort. Throw everything at the wall, and either we're going to end with a bang or we're going to have one of the most compelling reasons to give us a third season. One of these two things is going to happen. Obviously, it's more of the bang and then quiet after the gunshot.
I like the bang. I genuinely do like the bang.
I want to see what season 3, if they would have got a season 3, how that would have ended. Because season 1 ended with Cooper getting shot and that being like, and a lot of like loose ends. Mark Frost has stated he went through as much as possible to get loose ends opened up in season 1 ending, so that way they'd have a reason for season 2. And season 2 comes along and like doubles or triples the amount of like cliffhangers and the audacity of what's going on. A fate worse than being shot is Bob in the Reflection, arguably. Okay, if they would have given a season 3 right away, what would that ending have looked like? What could they do to this poor guy any further? They've shot him, they've bobbed him, what's next?
They bobbed him.
They bobbed him. Are they gonna buzz him? The ending of season 3 would have been Cooper shaving and then just a pile of
everyone
ash
just spontaneously
in the wonderful
combusts
clothes.
Slowly. Like every single character by the end of the next series would spontaneously combust. Walk with everybody.
It just cuts to every single. It's like not to spoil Evangelion, but there's a scene in Evangelion that reminds me of. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. Also, just kind of mentioning what we're talking about David Lynch here. Issue number 3 has a article about the card art being released, and David Lynch, we got a quote on the card art. We finally have some context on the card art.
Yay!
David Lynch said, and I quote the man, "These cards are mighty cool. It's going to be a really nifty set." End quote. So he endorses the cards and he thinks they're cool. Does that mean that he had a lot of involvement in writing them? Who knows? Probably not. He just said, nice.
Nice. I mean, if you end up seeing a piece of material come through and it's a little bit of a different thing and you look at it and it's like, hey, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's very honest.
No, I think it's a good response. I just think it's funny. If you ever want like an official statement from David Lynch on the card art, there you go. They're cool and they're nifty. That's your
I much
statement.
prefer like cool and nifty and just like sort of like, yeah, acknowledge it with a nodding head rather than these are important for every narrative. That
every Twin Peaks fan needs at least 5 packs of these.
At least that amount to unlock the secrets that is Twin Peaks. If you have 4 sets, you won't come close.
Speaking of secrets, code expert Major Briggs is called in to help with the Gazette with a crucial problem.
Yeah, because apparently, like, they did this to me, and specifically me, only me, where they're just, like, saying, hey, guys, seems there's some form of, like, hacker or virus or something going on inside the paper itself. Oh, we need an expert like Major Briggs to bring in, but there's some weird things going on with our paper. I didn't know.
No, I didn't find it either. I don't think there's any codes in the issues, because they say in the article that they are doing whatever they can to prevent these secret messages from being printed. It's just that something keeps adding messages they have to keep deleting before the thing goes out to press. I think they got them all. Unless you and I just failed.
I feel like I failed spectacularly because if you had to, unless they forgot to add it in.
This is also possible.
At the end of it. Like, there's something that comes close just because there's some mad ravings that go off onto the 3rd issue.
Not rovings. Just clarifying for the listener.
Thank you. But regardless, it must be extremely well hidden otherwise because, like, why else would you introduce a concept and say, hey guys, wait another month or more if this keeps going, and just bring up this idea of Major Briggs, like, making mention of, like, these mystical matters, if you will, these overall strange edits that just keep appearing.
Bruh. Speaking of mistakes that are appearing, in issue number 2, again, we get a publishing in the personals of Cooper/Pete's answer to Wyndham Earle's chess move. However, it is a mistake. The published answer is B to B4, or bishop to queen bishop 4, instead of, as it's supposed to be in the show, P to QN3, or pawn to the queen's knight 3.
I love this. You know why I love it? Because I went crazy on the chess, and it seems there's other people out there who went crazy on the chess too, judging from the individuals who are very intrigued on the weirdness of the chess.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, does
I'm
it?
not alone, Kalil!
See, here's the thing, though. I think it's just a poorly thought out chess metaphor, and I don't think it was actually meant to be that much of a serious game, because Wyndham Earle literally throws the thing off the table. So I don't think there's an answer. The more you look, I think the more you're just going to strain your eyes and hurt yourself.
I'm glad that I have people who strain with me.
They also make a little mention in the letter to the editor, the joke about the Moose article cutting off, because they're like, oh yeah, well, what we meant to say was, and then it cuts off again as well in the letter to the editor. So again, confirming that definitely was the intent, was to have the thing get cut off every time. Maybe the truth is not meant to be for all eyes, you know? There's a question in here in the letter to the editor about, what's going on with your newspaper? I thought you guys had standards, but you've been posting some really salacious, scandalous material.
There was a sexy article going into some of the overall nature and foliage inside the overall first issue that got very spicy, talking about, like, how, like, trees continue forward in the most, like, romanticized way, to say the least.
They were very offended, and we get context that Lana Milford was the one who has been pushing for these things, and she, in fact, writes 2 of them.
Yep, 2 of 3. So from this point on, 2nd issue, 3rd issue, it is her. The 1st issue was not her. She was just apparently pushing that article.
Well, it could have, does the author stated, it could have just been her, and they just didn't give an author name. Either way, point is, she's pushing for these things, and she does have clout because she's inherited Dougie's fortune. I assume she did inherit some authorial control over the Gazette.
And so what do you do when you have authorial control of the Gazette? You write stuff about sexy porcupines.
I think it's legitimately very funny. I think it's actually very good.
It's actually very good. Here's the thing,
and she's not a bad writer.
She's not a bad writer. This is very much you know those like romanticized like novels, if you will, with like the very buff dudes with the thin
romance
shirts with
novels,
the nipples and so on. Just replace that man with a porcupine, and she like goes into like the like this great competition of two passionate individuals facing each other in deep combat for the sake of like getting the interest of this mate. Who this mate will end up using this overall individual, having this overall power dynamic. And again, it's like this is a small article in Short Story. It's like, my God, is this spicy?
And then how do you possibly make something steamier and hotter than that? Volcanoes. The third issue has a volcano love story.
Yep, volcano love story, the grinding of plates, if you will, of the overall Earth. What's bigger than a porcupine to make love metaphors with and explosion metaphors with? The literal Earth itself. So
I don't know where she would have gone if issue 4 would have come out. The Big Bang. I don't know where you go after issue 4 then, but it's going to escalate somehow.
Lana Milford will find a way.
I don't know. I actually really enjoy it because it's a fun thought. Like, if Lana Milford did, in fact, inherit some rights over the magazine and she's in Twin Peaks for like, a few months after Dougie passes, what does she do with her power? And this is what she does. Is very amusing. Because, again, they're not badly written. They are very poetic. For what they are.
Lana Milford is talented in this specific sect. I would say that Lana Milford, if you publish a full-on sexy porcupine tale, I will
Which kind of tale do you mean?
Yes.
We get another segment of The Roving Eye, this time with Tim Pinkle, a familiar face who continues to grow in power every time we read about him in these supplementary materials.
He just keeps popping up.
We
discover about his like big business with Tim and Tom.
Yeah. What can I say? I think the people at the time, the Access Guide and the Gazette people, they knew there was some potential in Tim Pinkle. They knew there was an untapped resource in Mr. Tim Pinkle. So we find out a little bit more about his taxidermy situation, that he taxidermies pets as well as wild game. Mm-hmm. And when he's asked, is taxidermy an art form? He just gets completely thrown off. Like, doesn't even know how to answer that. And then after a while, he considers it more and he says, you know what? Perhaps it's a dying art, which is very funny as a pun. It's a dying art form, but also it's an art of the dying. So it's funny. He says, maybe art is dead. And then he continues with the interview. And the part that strikes me as the most interesting is that the interviewer asks how he feels. Suppose an animal rights activist, told you, Mr. Pinkle, that taxidermy is in some way objectionable. How would you respond? And Tim Pinkle actually gives a rather passionate response.
Preserve their bodies with skill, affection, and respect.
I want to give the actual quote here because I think it's actually very poetic.
Yeah, please. But already that note, to keep it off to the side, if you will, is nice. It is. This is actually the best philosophy I've ever gotten out of a Pinkle.
It's incredible. Quote, I don't know how to do a Pinkle voice, so I'm just going to do what it feels natural to me, okay? Quote, did you know that the phases of the moon can be seen in a cat's eye? It's hard to get marbles to do that. My father spent many hours trying. He figured out how it could be done electronically, but we didn't want to have to offer warranties and telephone support. He was a detail man. I am my father's son. He didn't kill animals, and neither do I. If I could, I'd bring them back to life. But the best I can do is preserve their bodies with skill, affection, and respect. And then right after that, there's a joke about him flipping the cat over and doing funny things with the cat body.
Yeah, if you don't like taxidermy and the physicality of it, this does go into funky detail. But on the same note,
it's very playful.
It's very playful. It is something that is probably the most character we'll get out of Twin Peakle.
Twin Peakle. Hey, Twin Pinklers. Welcome to the Gazette.
It's so much worse.
It's so much worse. Twin Peaklers. So we get an interview with Joan Chen, the actor who plays Josie, in an article titled Now and Chen.
Yeah, it would seem that both Josie character and later on we'll get to an article from
Michael Horse. Well, it's an interview of Michael Horse.
Interview of Michael Horse. called A Man Called Horse, if you will. Two very notable names, especially considering we literally have Ray Wise and Leland Palmer, and I think that Richard Bamers was, what was that again?
It was just like In Deep with Richard Bamers.
In Deep with
Past
Richard
the Fourth Wall or whatever. Yeah, they don't emphasize the name as much as the ones here. And it's kind of unfortunate because there was a really good pun you could have done with the Ray Wise interview. They went with Ray Wise on Leland Palmer, the most boring option.
Yes.
They could have gone with Wise Words on Leland Palmer, referencing his last name as
You
Wise.
should have written for the newspaper.
I really should have.
You weren't born yet, but
Anyway.
you should have.
And back to Joan Chen. When asked if she enjoys the character of Josie, Chen's response is that it was interesting. She changes so much. There are many different writers. And she kind of doesn't really give a direct answer on if she actually enjoys the character at first. Then eventually, a bit later, she says, actually, I like playing Josie. She's an intriguing person. But then, pretty quickly after, notes that it got to a point where no writer or director really knew what to do with her. So at least reading into the interview a bit, maybe a bit too much, I don't know. It does seem like Joan Chen likes elements of the character, but probably felt the character was not very well utilized throughout consistently.
It seems that at the very least there's still some pause and some curiosity with it, because as she sort of describes the drawer knob, she describes that as interesting between life and death.
But she still admits she has no idea.
Yeah.
She just thinks there's something profound, but she doesn't get it.
Yeah, with Joan Chen, it seems that she was raised up through a film school with a 2-year training course under a famed actress by the name of, forgive me if I mispronounce, Zhang Ruihang, which apparently was a big actor when it came to Chinese film and so on. There's some very nice insights that go into Joan Chen's sort of, I would say, feelings for her overall work. She comes off extremely more professional than some, say, for example, of the other interviews that we get off later, if you will. It seems that she's very direct and also views film in very much of a very professional lens, is what the vibe I'm mostly getting off of Joan.
Who would you say was less professional then?
It's not less professional, but more so I find that, say, for example, Richard Bamers comes off as a little bit more spiritual, if you will. He goes into it more so in a respect that seems open to the discussion of film as a greater whole, while this one is far more focused, I would say almost nearly statistical, but not bring up statistics, but more reserved and more so recognizing it with a sort of straight and back stance more than a bent back stance.
Yeah, a bit more straightforward, but drier.
Yes.
I would say. I just think it's interesting amidst actors who would probably speak very positively about their character in almost universal way. I do sense a bit of reservation with Joan Chen when it comes to Josie.
Yeah.
And maybe some of it's just my interpretation, but it's the, when asked very directly her feelings on the character, it's the hesitance and kind of the framing and the continuous reminder that not all the writers really knew what to do with this character. It makes me think of the way that Josie in the show would occasionally be sexualized for the scenes between her and Truman.
Yes.
It makes me think of some of the ways in which Josie's character fell kind of to the sideline of the storylines. I don't know. I think Josie was someone that could have always been better. And I think that Joan Chen as an actor maybe wasn't as fully utilized, because one of my favorite scenes still is, and I think it's an underrated scene, is when we get the scene between Josie and Hank and they do the blood oath. And I think that that's one of those rare scenes where both of those actors really get to put forward their nuances and subtleties in their gestures, in their tones, because they're playing mind games with each other.
Yes.
And it's a back and forth. And I think that's where both of those actors really shined. And I don't know if all the time Joan Chen was being utilized fully as someone who was a very experienced actor.
A lot of Joan Chen's character, Josie, was very chameleon-like. Someone who fades into the background, but mostly is still making moves or just making sure that she is in a safe spot. Hank was the only time in which that was challenged, in which she's got to change tactics, because that would just not work with Hank, which is very promising as far as Joan Chen is concerned. But when you kind of regard, for the most part, this very talented actress that apparently has worked very hard into her own repertoire, to have a character that's very similar throughout the entire series and can only work inside that realm of subtleties, I can see where not only a challenge can come through, but also maybe a potential sort of I wouldn't say as severe as distaste, but maybe just a lessened interest, if you will.
And I think that it's hard because, the writers had so many characters and such a large cast, and you had established actors like Richard Beymer and Russ Tamblyn, but I think it's uneven. I think that Richard Beymer got a great amount of opportunities to flex. And I love it. I love that he got the flex.
He got choked out onto flexing. Remember with the old story about him having to eat the sandwich, the great sale is like he's like supposed to shove it. He's like, no, more, I want more.
And I think Piper Laurie, also established actor, got a lot of chances to really flex.
I don't think that there were many points in which like Joan was ever told more.
That's a good way to put it. Speaking of Blood Brother Hank writes an opinion article. And this is, again, the character Hank, not the actor for Hank.
Yep, this is featured inside of good old issue 3, in which we have Hank, who is, mind you, being arrested.
Yes, at this exact
time.
And introduces himself as a local denizen, songwriter, singer, actor, family man, and chef. I like that we get that context. Again, because I don't consider this canon, I don't think it suddenly adds songwriter to his actual character in my headcanon. But I like this interpretation of Hank, where he's a songwriter, a singer, and an actor. I don't know who wrote this. I don't know if this was input from the actor or any of the show's writers, or if this was kind of just the Gazette going rogue here. But it is funny that he describes himself with so many different terms. So many accolades. He goes on, to go against the cities that never sleep. Sleep is important. Why would you want to live in a place where the city never sleeps? No, here in Twin Peaks, we sleep like there is no tomorrows, only yesterdays. Which, my God.
Just your future yesterday.
Okay, pausing on Craig for a moment. It's the idea, which I think is extremely, hitting the nail on the head in a very good way, that Twin Peaks, yeah, you're right. They are so drawn to the past.
Yep.
They are so consumed by their past guilts, their past loves, their plastic motivations, that there is only yesterdays, there's no tomorrow. But how bleak that sounds, there's no future. There's only the past. There's not even the present. It's very hard to tap into the present in Twin Peaks.
It's a very nostalgic town, and I think the recognition of someone such as Hank through this is it's very notable, and I think it does set a tone that either Twin Peaks fans could very much recognize, or for your consideration, sort of like drop in the bucket. But there's a great amount of humor with everything happening, especially since in an earlier issue, when Empty Wentz came around, and that was a big plot point saying, this review could change everything. This could be a problem. We can't have this go bad. Literally, it goes bad, and then the article goes yep, and nothing happened.
Yeah, they just said that the Seattle Times article from MT Wentz, it hasn't affected the business at all. But again, that's according to Hank Jennings.
That's according to Hank Jennings.
Do we believe Hank Jennings?
Yes, at this point, I do believe in Hank Jennings' belief that everyone lives in the past in Twin Peaks. I don't think that anyone...
No, I'm saying, do we believe his business figures? When he reports, the business is going great.
Yes, I think that... by extension, for the city of Twin Peaks, I don't think any of them are going to care about MT Wentz's opinion here. And whether or not you feel MT Wentz's opinion is true or not, for the overall fanciful stuff that should be added to the menu and here or there, at the end of the day, Twin Peaks lives so nostalgically that I don't see anything moving from its position. It has to be of something of great force to let anything move an inch.
Which is so, again, I think interesting is that when Hank says it, I don't think he means it as a negative thing. I think he says it's almost a positive thing. But it can be read both ways.
It can be read both ways, but I think everyone reads this as a positive thing in Twin Peaks.
In the town, yeah.
In the town, physically in the town.
Maybe there's some rebels. I think that maybe part of Bobby, if he was aware of, maybe he would kind of rally against it, but he's kind of distracted most of the time between his romance and Leo. I just also want to highlight one of the quotes Hank Jennings said, because again, I do not...
You've put up a good point. One of the things in which yes, very, very much so. Twin Peaks up to this point is a place not of change. The final episode is filled with change, but a lot of the youth are the ones most affected by any shifts of change that happen, just because, for the most part, they are the ones looking out for that sort of thing, and everything sort of grinds back onto them. And we see horrible things happen to the youth. We see Audrey literally blown to smithereens. We see Donna having traumatic ends, but that's because mostly everyone's holding on to them and constantly trying to keep them back into the past. the best ending for Twin Peaks came from people in which are from like families or situations where they are no longer held back. We have Shelley, who ended up losing Leo or does not have Leo in her life at the time. And then we have Bobby with the accepting like Major Briggs and just more so kind of like is more open, go with that sort of like flow end. They have the best ending, but that's just because there's no Twin Peaks past resistances holding on to them for dear life. They are the less likely to go through the overall shredder in that. They are in opposition to that nostalgic ideal because they are moving forward, Bobby away from his overall drug issues and overall dark dealings there, and Shelley Johnson away from her abusive husbandship, that they are able to move away from the past for their present and future. That's actually really compelling. And like them having the happy ending, only now do I realize this. Thank you, Kalil.
You know what's even more compelling?
What's more compelling?
Hank Jennings' word in this article that I do not think is canon at all. Hank Jennings says, quote, "I love all the rain. It is truly a glorious feeling, especially when I'm singing in it."
Remember, he is a singer.
Yeah, I don't believe Hank Jennings, in my heart of hearts, sings in the rain as a normal part of his routine.
But singing in the rain is commonly used for, like, a rain being... Like, I think that there's a lot inside of our generation that deals with, like, rain being more calm, if you will. But for the most part, like, rain's association, dampness, wetness, is usually something filled with, like, misery or great conflict. To sing in opposition of the world itself, I think that Hank Jennings' more aloof tone inside of this overall thing, despite being, like, pulled away straight into jail and just saying like, yep, I can just sing in the rain, like not letting it hit him too hard. It's something that makes sense with the Hank being introduced to this, but I find the Hank inside of the Secret History of Twin Peaks more compelling, where he's filled with more regrets rather than I have no weight against me, fear me.
I just didn't believe he sang in the rain literally. I was going for the literal interpretation of I don't think Hank goes busting into musical numbers. But, you know, I mean, to each their own. To each their own. Issue 3 also has the Ham Radio Fun Goes Haywire article, in which we get the story of Leroy Morris, everyone's favorite Twin Peaks character.
Yeah, my favorite.
A small boy with a large cast on his arm picked up a voice with a peculiar accent on the ham radio, and that voice told him to go to the window. But, you know, he didn't at first. And then he did turn on some other radio, I think it was. Then another voice said, "Go to the window." He's like, "Fine, I'll go to the window." And then some point around when he went to the window and when he woke up 3 days later in Kalil Memorial Hospital, he lost consciousness.
Oh,
somewhere in
the
that
fun
time.
Potential abductions, if you will, and the fun little means of like people disappearing
This
and then
one
electricity
hits with
leading them.
this one hits with the history of Twin Peaks very well.
It does.
In a way that it's almost prescient. And then he talks about in the article kind of his memories of the experience, and in the middle of it is this giant chunk of all capital letters, ominous messaging, forwarded and back-ended by like plus and caret, plus and caret, plus and caret, plus and caret. So I'm wondering, like, the best I can come up with, is this the message that they were trying to prevent with the glitch? Because I took it to be in the article. But like it is structured with like a text plus and caret.
It is text plus and caret. It's just the fun part is that...
And if you skip it, what it says is, "I remember seeing a flicker of light and felt a buzz in the back of my head. I don't remember anything else, sorry."
It's one of those...
You can just remove all that for ominous text and it still makes sense.
It still makes sense. It's the big question of like, when you are given something that says like, text just keeps being added into the articles, and then in the following issue you have something like this, it almost feels like too broadside of a barn to hit, that it almost like makes me look at it like this has to be potentially a red herring. Like it seems too fitting for it to have these shifts and changes.
So
that almost bothers me.
Whether you take it then to be the implications of the glitch and they weren't able to scrub this before issue 3 came out, or if you take it to be something in the child that is speaking out when asked what happened. Either way, this is the message we get. "Unspoken words burn unworthy, yet the people desire to hear that which they have already known. That which they have already felt turning in their minds, felt itching in their palms. The people have carried before the knowledge of the power that lies in the hands of the other form. It presses against the people. They turn away, yet feel it still. Be warned, Twin Peaks, the people are you." And then it ends. What do you make of that message, regardless of its source?
This piece is very much just an omen, if you will, like from whatever entity is delivering it, it's an omen for people to outright beware. It doesn't go into things too specifically, but it's saying how the people are you of Twin Peaks and how you all are falling into something greater. Feels the itching inside their palms, presses against the people, be warned, Twin Peaks, the people are you. The fact that there is an entity that holds on to these overall ideals and people sort of like chase after them. Like, we already know Twin Peaks is filled with temptation thanks to things such as the Black Lodge, explorations of the Black Lodge, and the fact that Twin Peaks even sort of like dabbles into the fact that this has been consistent throughout generations. What makes Twin Peaks the U.S. capital of whatever the hell's going on there? If I had to think of something thematically, we just spoke recently about nostalgia of the people and their obsession with the nostalgia. Maybe that constant longing and always kind of like going back into this overall fire, something being held passionately by these entities, whatever it may be, for them to keep on and keep hold on to it and sort of like build this Twin Peaks religion, if you will, on how things are the same, should stay the same, be the same. I think I think this message sort of like eclipses around that idea.
So not necessarily the message is specifically to nostalgia, more just a general omen, and you're saying it could be nostalgia interpretation-wise.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's fair. That's fair. I think that works. And I mean, if you wanted to think of it as nostalgia, the idea that there's this itching desire to go back, they've already known and they want to hear it again. They used to have something they're going back to. I think that works for nostalgia. I personally feel like this message probably meant nothing, in the sense that I think this is the kind of thing you write if you want to sound cryptic and ominous.
It's literally a large tale just saying like, oh yeah, you guys, you shouldn't keep doing this. There's this other thing that has what you want, and you keep chasing it, but you don't want it. It's vague enough that if they ever needed to twist it for whatever reason for future issues, it's malleable.
Because it isn't made by the writers of the show, presumably. It's being made by fans of the show, so they don't know where the future plot lines are going to go to know if this means anything. They can't get too specific because they don't know where it's going. Just the ominous nature, yeah, I guess they can do that. I think it's fun. I like the idea of having the all caps text, regardless, where it comes from. I'm a big fan of the Twin Peakers in the hands of an angry god. Big fan of that vibe they're going for here. But yeah, I think it's just cryptic for the sake of being cryptic.
Some might call those words cryptic. Some might call them wise. I imagine that you might have a few things to say on a few wiser words. The wisest of words. The word of the wise. Ray Wise. There's words from Ray Wise here. Do you want to talk about Ray Wise?
We get some repeat information about Ray Wise, the actor, that he had been called in to interview first for the role of Sheriff Truman, and then had been called back later for Leland Palmer. I believe we've mentioned that one before.
Have inside the look backs, yes.
Still interesting to think about.
Yes.
And they had to do the scene where Leland died with the sprinklers raining down upon him. Ray Wise said about 4 or 5 times, because each time they had to do it a little bit differently. And because of the sprinklers constantly going, by the time they were on like their 4th or 5th time, they could hardly keep their eyes open at all just because of all the water coming down on them.
Fair.
That sounds awful to have to work through.
Absolutely.
For everyone involved. and I'm curious, I'd be curious to know which take they went with. I'd be curious to know if they went with take 1 and all of the work they did afterward really didn't actually matter for the show. If they amalgamated a few of the takes together, or if it was take 5 and they were so broken down that was the best version emotionally.
No, it's obviously the other option, which everything was CGI'd in.
Yeah, none of the 5 takes were good enough.
Nope. They dubbed over it was CGI'd. It was very impressive for the time.
Very impressive. As Ray Wise tells it, he was in a room after the Emmy Awards happened with David Lynch, Mark Frost, Richard Beymer, and Sheryl Lee. And they were in that room. That is when Leland was told that's when Ray Wise was told that Leland was the killer. So in other words, he found out that he was the killer the same time that Richard Beymer found out that this was the killer. And Beymer at that time put his arm around him and told him that history was being made here. And we also get confirmation again that there was an extra scene shot with Benjamin Horne as the killer. And I'll be honest with you, it's probably, for my current feelings, my number one piece of lost media. If I could get my hands on the scene where Richard Beymer had Ben Horn killing Maddie, to see how that looked with him looking in the mirror, him doing the scene, the general atmosphere and vibe of that portrayal. I have never seen Ben go Bob mode. I would be curious to see how Richard Beymer did it.
Now, mind you, it was shot, but it wasn't edited. At that point, you might just have a series of shots of Richard Beymer dancing around. The reason
That'd
why
be
is
funny.
because,
That'd be great in
it
of
would
itself.
just be Benjamin Horn looking into the mirror of Benjamin Horn.
Okay, that'd be funny in its own way. I would just, whatever they have, I'd want that.
He's just for some reason in the Palmer household.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It would just be interesting to see how they shot it and how they did it. And I'm curious, how effective that actually was at throwing people off. Maybe they just, did they make the one with Richard Beymer more obvious and then do the Leland one secretly? Because I feel
How was everything on set too? Just I imagine other people are on set just in case they may be needed for the day, or was it just a sanctioned day in which only limited amount of people were allowed in? In which case, it's I'm sure that Richard Beymer and Ray Wise would end up crossing paths. Would they know from each other from that?
Well, they supposedly they both knew the killer was really Leland.
Yes.
Because I don't know if it's ever been clear before if Richard Beymer, when he did the scene, did he fully know that he wasn't the killer? He was just doing this as a ruse.
My thoughts exactly, or my question exactly.
Now it seems like from Ray Wise's version that Beymer literally was there, put his arm around him, and knew. That's my take of it, and I'm assuming that they found out before the scene was shot.
Or maybe it's put arm around. It's man, we're both the killer. How wild is
that?
Wild. Bob works in mysterious ways.
Probably the most interesting part of the interview for me was when asked if he felt comfortable being this character or not. And Ray Wise said it did disturb him because he's a family man himself, but, quote, Mark Frost assured me the character would be rectified in the final episodes, where it becomes clear that Leland was really a victim and innocent, like Laura. Did that happen, Professor? Did Leland get rectified and shown to be a victim and innocent just like Laura?
Leland's death underneath the sprinkler system. Leland's interactions towards the end. You and I have spoken to great length, especially at the end of Fire Walk With Me. I know that's not involved, but still. In the larger character of Leland Palmer, that's a complicated question. I don't think that there's necessarily a clear answer on, how this person would be very rectified or would be clearly set as that overall victim. I think you and I still hold up some of these questions of how much is Bob, how much is Leland, what is Bob, etc., etc. So on the surface level, if we go through emotional vulnerability and the abuses found from the supernatural, if we just put everything else aside, I think on a surface level, yes. It's just on how much do you still continue to believe that as you keep digging.
So, that's the question, too, is when Mark Frost said the final episodes.
Yes.
Is it referring to the final episodes of Leland Palmer before the character dies, or the final episodes of the show?
Good question.
And it's not clear from Ray Wise's wording. And let's take it a step further. Let's say Mark Frost meant the final episodes of the show.
Yes.
Did that mean season 2? Or did that mean if they got a season 3?
Yep. Curious.
Because if we just go by the last, final moments of Leland Palmer, I would take issue with the idea of the final episodes, because it's really only one scene in the final episode of Leland's life, the death scene, where we get any sort of rectifying.
It's your final episode.
But what I'm getting at is that I don't think it's episodes where it became clear Leland was a victim. Leland spent most of those last episodes cackling like a madman murderer person with bodies in his golf bag.
Okay, but to be fair, I think that if it was played more subtly, I don't think that the dramatic moment would be hit as hard.
I love that. Okay. We both have issues with episode 16, but in general, I love the moments where Leland gets to go cackling. I'm just saying it'd be incorrect to say that Mark Frost took episodes, plural, to show that Leland was a victim and an innocent. There's one scene. It's a very powerful scene. It is his last scene in the living world. Mm-hmm. But is that enough? And we're kind of given enough reason to doubt it that I don't know if that really, it makes it, as Ray Wise puts it, it becomes clear that Leland was a victim. I don't know if it becomes clear. It is suggested. It is brought up that Leland might be that way.
Yes.
And then if we do take it the final episodes of season 2, Leland does say in the last episode that he did not kill anybody. Well, Leland, with an asterisk, though, because he is the gray-eyed or white-eyed version in the Black Lodge, which may or may not be A, dead spirit of living real Leland, B, Doppel Leland, who is somehow still alive waiting with the body host dead, or C, just Bob, or D, an amalgamation of Cooper's subconscious that isn't even really there.
I just love, like, those possibilities there in hand, but I also love the idea that Mark Frost is like, don't worry, we're going to make it very clear that you were a victim. It's like literally like walking on stage like, I didn't do it!
So, again,
I mean, it's not false advertising if that's by that perspective.
I just think it's interesting that Ray Wise was told by the co-creator, it'll be clear that Leland was a victim and innocent, just like Laura. Because if true, that does suggest an authorial intent that I don't think was very obvious in the final products of the show. And I think David Lynch actively in Fire Walk With Me pushes against it. Because I think that it's really hard to exonerate Leland after seeing Fire Walk With Me.
Not to mention...
to really say that this man was innocent and all good. I think that's way too difficult. You can make a case, but it ain't clear.
And if we put up into possibility J, if you will, like out of all these letters eventually get down to J.
I'm nervous about meeting Jay tonight.
It could be something that there was an intention at that point of the production. Like there was an idea at that point of production where he said that to him at that point of production. But is that how it turned out? Yeah, there might have been a change. So productions and trying to like juggle the concept of a show and keep it moving with some form of momentum with all sorts of individuals working passionately on it. Like I can believe that there could have been also a change.
Curious how Ray Wise felt about doing Fire Walk With Me. Because like when he's doing that, obviously that doesn't exonerate his character. So yeah, obviously he took it and he did a great job with Fire Walk With Me. So
he didn't say no to the pig's head though.
He did he say, was that him that
said
no?
That was Laura Palmer that said no. I never heard about Ray Wise saying no to
yeah, that was Cheryl Lee who said no to that. And thank God. That would have been such a bad decision. It would have been too it would have been too blatant in a way that's not really very good.
Who needs subtlety?
And then the last article that I want to highlight in the Twin Peaks Gazette would be the interview titled A Man Called Horse.
Yes.
And this is a interview about the actor Michael Horse who played Hawk, a.k.a. Deputy Hill. And there's a great write-up at the start that goes through Michael Horse's life and his talents. And if you are able to get your hands on somehow reading this Gazette, I do think it's worth a look. I think it's very good. It's a very good look at him. It does go through how he first met David Lynch on the set of The Cowboy and the Frenchman, which obviously the actor had been part of there. And he previously worked with casting director Joanna Ray. So also through Joanna Ray came in touch. I feel like, again, Joanna Ray is one of those like unsung heroes of Twin Peaks as a casting agent because,
I've only heard like great things about Joanna Ray from everyone who's ever spoken about her ever.
And casting is so huge, obviously, in any show, but in Twin Peaks, it's such a mix of like old, well-known actors and new up-and-coming people who, frankly, not all of them we ever saw that much of again, but they shined in Twin Peaks.
I have nothing inside the opposite category that says that she's anything short of a miracle worker for like how she's able to get people together that need to be in their spot.
And we get Michael Horse talking about his character's Spot a little bit, that he sees Hawk as a third point of view. He says, quote, "You have the good and the evil, and then you have Hawk. He knows, and his people know, that all this existed long before the town of Twin Peaks did. He knows the forces of good and evil. He, I think, is like the conscience of Twin Peaks." So I want to run that by you, Professor. Do you think Hawk is the conscience of Twin Peaks? Is like the conscience, not to misquote.
In the fleeting moments, he's the guy that everyone seems to love. Everyone's best friend is Hawk. And it seems for the most part, Hawk is able to assist not only in an emotional capacity, but also in a physical capacity at multiple points, that it almost borders onto the realm that Twin Peaks being mystical has a savior amongst it, and his name is Hawk. So
is he is a savior a conscience?
A savior's conscience depends. Depends on whether or not you take this conscience as a relatively good thing or if it's going to be something that's heavily biased. A conscience is something very internal, and Twin Peaks as a tone is very full of itself.
Is there someone you would say is up there with Hawk if you were to pick the conscience of Twin Peaks? Who would you pick either as like a running opposition to Hawk. Someone else.
Log.
The Log?
The actual Log.
That's
yes.
actually, that's a good one. I think that's a good one. I could see that. It's obviously not Dr. Jacoby, so we're not gonna. I try to think who else. I mean, like, I think Sheriff Truman unfortunately isn't.
No, I
think he's too much of a. He's a mortal man struggling with his own problems.
I think that he is a man that's more focused on making sure the world around him is doing okay, but he's mostly focused on his boys group and his girlfriend.
And Garland Briggs is conscientious, but I think he's got his mind in other planes of existence that aren't the town of Twin Peaks as much. Whereas Hawk is a man of the town. Mm-hmm. So I think that Hawk is a really good candidate if we are to have to pick someone.
Yep, great pick candidate to pick someone for the new sheriff of the town. Someone who should be the
sheriff.
lawman.
He should be.
He should wear...
Ah!
Is it just required to wear the cowboy hat if you're the sheriff?
No.
That's the sheriff hat.
I don't think you need to. I like to believe Truman just wants to wear it. Because Truman himself likes cowboys. We learned in the Secret History book that his brother liked cowboy-type books. I just like to believe that they like cowboys.
Okay.
Michael Horse also talked a bit about his involvement in charities and benefits. And I went through a little bit of a rabbit hole myself. Stop playing with the cat. I'm talking about serious things right now on the podcast. So, Michael Horse was involved in a benefit for Leonard Peltier, who I had not heard of prior. So, for those who don't know, like myself, Peltier is a Native American activist who was convicted of aiding and abetting murder following the deaths of 2 FBI agents.
Okay.
He was put in jail in 1977, and by the time that Michael Horse was interviewed for the Gazette, this man had been in jail for 14 years. As of 2022, when this episode is being recorded, he is still in jail. According to Wikipedia, Amnesty International, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, and the 14th Dalai Lama, as well as many human rights watchdog groups, have called for clemency for Peltier. Clemency and forgiveness, which in 2017, then U.S. President Barack Obama denied, as presidents before and obviously after him would continue to not grant. So when it came up again during Obama's presidency, he did not go for that. So it's kind of a complicated case where there are people who definitely side with the idea that Peltier either did not do it or is being wrongly sentenced, inordinately sentenced. Peltier admits to being at the scene where this happened, but had not been the one to do the killing.
Okay.
So there is a lot of back and forth on this. Peltier seems like an interesting person. There's some background also that he had actually ran for president while in jail.
Oh.
So in 2004, he ran for president, and then in 2020, he briefly ran for vice president alongside someone else, but then he rescinded that because of health issues. So, he's been active.
Wild.
He's been active in politics from prison. And obviously, a lot of people have been fighting and advocating for him because even by the time, like I said, Michael Horse's interview, that had been 14 years later. And now it's gone even further in time, and there are still people calling for that. So I'm not going to take a side without doing research. I just think it's a pretty interesting situation that, again, I never heard about. You don't hear about these kind of people very much.
You don't.
Which is unfortunate, but interesting nonetheless.
Yes.
Michael Horse describes also in his own life having to live in 2 worlds, as he puts it. The traditional environment of kind of his culture and heritage, as well as the modern American world. And he says that you have to live in both worlds in order to survive. And obviously there's things you can draw parallels to the idea of, between two worlds.
Exactly.
But
That's the first thing that went to my head.
I think Michael Horse's interview is pretty good at giving like a good picture of his overall view in life.
Yes.
And, you couple that with the interview material we'd seen from him before and some of the special features. He seems like an all-around, like, principled guy. I do wish I had seen more of him in filmmaking and in other media. We'll have to see, obviously, in the return if we get to revisit Michael Horse or not. He should be the sheriff by then, right?
He should be.
He should be.
He should be, especially with everything that happened with Truman. He should be.
He should be. Anyway, so I have a wonderful and strange question of the week for you, Professor.
Yes, I do agree. Hawk should be sheriff. I'm glad that we got through this question. Here we go. Cue the music.
No!
Damn it.
So I've asked you many times when we watched the show originally, who killed Laura Palmer? And now we're about to reapproach the show with the international pilot and with the return.
Laura Palmer? Got
No.
it. Oh.
My question for you is, what killed Twin Peaks?
Twin Peaks? Did Twin Peaks die?
You take the question however you want.
I take the question out of confusion. I don't think Twin Peaks has died. I think that it has continued to live on in all sorts of different forms between the fan communities that decide to make either series, short films, forms of art, music. I think that as far as continued publications, this podcast, this is where Twin Peaks continues to live on from. I think that through inspirations of people who saw Twin Peaks and then integrate the sort of like fun ideas or like try to push themselves in certain fashions, and you see Twin Peaks references everywhere, especially whenever it comes to the Red Room. I don't think things die just because they've ended. I think that they die after everyone's forgotten about them. It's very the Coco-esque theme of death. Once things are forgotten, that's when it reaches its final death. But Twin Peaks does live on in a respectful, memorable, and in its actions way. And I'll even take it a step further beyond Coco. Those actions, those new inspirations are still going to keep moving it forward. Things influenced Twin Peaks before Twin Peaks 2, and those live on despite we will never know their names. There will be names forgotten in history, but I don't really think that things have been forgotten as long as there's sentient life around.
So would you say that Laura Palmer also, in that very, metaphorical but perhaps true way, she also never died?
Yeah.
Because her influence continues to resonate.
My God, she's at the end of every episode, yes!
She is dead, and yet she lives.
And yet she still haunts us. We are right sitting there next to her gravestone, right next to Donna. We're here for you, Donna.
They really couldn't bury her deep enough, could they?
Dig it.